Montana Territory. Spring of 1879, the wind over the Bitterroot Range carried a chill that never quite left a man, even in sunlight. Noah Dempsey stood at the edge of the meadow. Boots sunk in mud just thawed from snow, his hat pulled low over his brow. The wooden cross at his feet was worn now, the carving nearly faded. "Clara," he said softly, his voice rough as gravel, "it has been 3 years." Each evening since the day she died birthing their stillborn son, he returned to this spot behind the old homestead. He never left Montana, could not. Her ghost lived in every pine needle, every creak of the porch boards. He had stopped speaking much, save to his horse and the wind. The neighbors let him be. The world had moved on. He had not. The house stood quiet behind him, weathered but upright, just like him. He kept it that way not because he was living, but because he was surviving. That changed the morning the wagon broke an axle on the trail near his land. He was hauling water from the creek when the sound of a child's cry hit him like a shot. He dropped the bucket and ran. At the bend of the trail, a broken-down wagon leaned sideways in the mud. A woman knelt by its wheel, her hands red with effort. 2 children, a girl and a boy, no older than 5 or 6, were huddled beneath a patchwork quilt in the back. The woman looked up as he approached, her face flushed, her eyes sharp. "Please tell me you are not just passing through," she said, breathless. He took a moment. Her hair was dark, braided down her back, but bits had come loose and clung to her cheeks. Her dress was plain, hem caked in mud. She looked worn out, not weak. "You are on my land," he said. "What happened?" Will snapped. "Been trying to fix it since dawn," she said. "I have 2 children in the back, we have nowhere else to go." He glanced over his shoulder. The sun was already dipping low, a storm was coming. He could smell it. "Get the children, you will stay with me tonight." She hesitated just a second, then nodded. "Faye," she called gently. "Finn, come out now." The little girl climbed down first, her dress too big for her, curls wild. The boy followed, holding onto her hand. They both looked hungry and tired, but they did not cry. They looked up at him like they were trying to figure out if he was safe. "I am Rowan Marks," the woman said. "These are my children. We were headed north. My husband left us last winter and never came back." Noah nodded once, then crouched to the children's level. "You can call me Mr. Dempsey. My house is not far. There is food and a fire." Rowan's eyes lingered on his face a moment, studying him. She seemed to decide something quietly, then took her children's hands and followed him. Inside, the cabin was warm, if simple. He cooked beans and cornbread while Rowan settled the children on a blanket near the hearth, whispering to them, smoothing their hair with her hands. He watched her, silent. When the children slept, curled on either side of a wool blanket, Rowan took a seat at the table with him. "You live alone," she said. "I do. But you built a home big enough for more." "I had more once." She did not ask. She just nodded, her hands wrapped around the warm mug he gave her. "You are welcome to stay, until your wagon is fixed," he said. "I have no money," she replied. "I did not ask for any." That night he sat on the porch while they slept inside. He stared up at the stars. Clara had been gone 3 years. And tonight, for the first time, the silence did not ache as much. It still hurt, but it did not feel like bleeding. The next morning he fixed the wagon. Rowan helped, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hands calloused. She did not talk much, but when she did, her voice was calm and sure. Finn followed Noah around the yard like a shadow. The boy did not speak much, but he watched everything. Faye helped Rowan hang laundry and asked questions about every bird she saw. Days stretched into a week. One evening, Rowan found Noah back at the grave, kneeling in the grass. She did not disturb him. She waited until he stood. "Your wife?" she asked. He nodded. "Her name was Clara. She died in childbirth." Rowan looked at the cross, then back at him. "I am sorry." He looked away. "I buried my heart with her." Rowan's voice was steady. "And yet you still breathe." It was not pity, it was truth. That night Rowan brought out her sewing kit by the fire. She began stitching the tear in Finn's coat. Noah sat across from her, whittling a piece of wood into the shape of a horse. He handed it to Finn when it was done. The boy smiled for the first time. A few nights later, a storm rolled in hard. Thunder cracked over the hills. Faye woke up crying. Rowan tried to calm her, but it was Noah who lifted her into his arms and walked her around the cabin until she fell asleep again. Rowan watched him from the hearth, her eyes soft. "You are good with them," she said. "It has been a long time since I held a child." Rowan stepped closer. Her hand brushed his arm. He stilled. "You do not have to forget her," she said, "but maybe you could still live." He looked at her, then really looked. There was something in her eyes. Not sorrow, not hope. Something steadier. He reached up gently and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Maybe," he said. She leaned in just an inch, but it was enough. That night he did not go to the grave. He stayed inside, near the warmth near her. And for the first time in 3 years, he slept through the night. By early May, the snowmelt had turned the low fields into a web of shallow creeks, and the cottonwoods along the riverbank had begun to leaf out in pale green. Noah worked the earth behind the barn with a quiet rhythm, turning soil for a garden that hadn't seen seed in years. Beside him, Rowan knelt with a sack of potatoes, cutting eyes into each one with a steady hand. "You ever grow anything?" he asked without looking up. "Beans and squash mostly," she said, brushing dirt from her palm. "Back in Kansas I kept a little patch, didn't have much room, but it fed us some winters." Noah nodded. "So you know how to keep things alive?" She glanced at him. "I do." They planted in silence after that, save for the rustle of wind through the grass and the call of a red-tailed hawk overhead. When they finished, Rowan shaded her eyes with her hand and looked over the furrows they'd laid down. "I didn't think I'd be planting anything this spring," she said. "You are," Noah replied. "Right here." That evening, Rowan took to the root cellar to sort through what stores were left from last winter. Faye followed her down, asking questions about the jars and sacks, her voice echoing in the cool space. Noah stayed above, chopping wood with Finn at his side, the boy handing over each split log like he'd been born knowing how. Later, when the children were asleep, Rowan brought out a folded scrap of paper worn at the edges. "I found this in the wagon," she said, laying it on the table. "It's a land notice. There's a parcel east of here, near a place called Hensley Creek." "I was aiming for it before the wheel gave out." Noah studied the paper. "That land's mostly rock and brush, hard to farm, no shelter that way." "I didn't know," she said. "It was what I could afford, figured I'd build as I went." He tapped the corner of the paper. "You still planning to go?" Rowan's eyes didn't drop. "I didn't come here to stay where I wasn't wanted." "You are not unwanted," his voice caught, then steadied. "I just don't know how to ask someone to stay." She folded the paper again, slow and deliberate. "You don't have to ask. You just have to want it." He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. The next morning, Noah hitched the wagon and rode out to the mill with Finn beside him. The boy had taken to Noah's quiet ways, and they passed the miles with only the creak of harnessed leather and the occasional call of a meadowlark. At the mill, Noah traded a sack of oats for a new axle and 2 bolts of muslin. Finn held the reins while he tied the load down. "You trust him now?" the miller asked, glancing at the boy. Noah didn't smile, but his voice was sure. "He's capable." Back at the homestead, Rowan was mending the chimney's stonework with clay and straw, her sleeves rolled high. Faye handed her pebbles and chattered about a turtle she'd seen by the creek. Noah watched them from the field a long moment before stepping inside. That night, they ate salt pork and onion stew. When the children had gone to bed, Rowan stayed by the fire, her eyes on the embers. "My husband wasn't cruel," she said. "He just couldn't hold still, always chasing something else, something better. One day he left and never came back." Noah said nothing. She kept her gaze on the fire. "I don't want a man who's running from ghosts. But I won't run from mine either." "I'm not running," Noah said, "just learning how to live with them." She reached across the table, her hand brushing his. He didn't pull away. Outside, the wind had settled. The house held its warmth. And in the quiet, something shifted, not sudden, not loud, but steady. Like spring after a long and bitter freeze. The sun hung low behind the hills when the preacher came riding up the trail. Dust clung to the hem of his coat, and his mare limped slightly from a loose shoe. Noah stepped off the porch before the rider reached the yard. "Reverend Mace," he said, nodding once. The man tipped his hat. "Heard you had company out here. Word reached the mission house." Rowan came out with a pail of water and paused when she saw the visitor. Faye peeked from behind her skirts, thumb pressed to her bottom lip. The Reverend dismounted, slow from the saddle. "I've been checking on families scattered since the thaw, trying to make sure folks have meals and shelter. Thought I'd offer the same here." Rowan set the pail down gently. "We're managing fine." "Glad to hear it," he said kindly. "But I'd still like to say a prayer if you'll allow it, for the strength of your household." Noah looked at Rowan. She gave a slight nod. Inside, they cleared space near the hearth. The children sat quiet, knees tucked under them. The Reverend opened his Bible, the pages worn thin. "Lord," he began, "bless this home, these hands that labor, and the hearts that carry sorrow. Let them find comfort in honest work and peace in one another's care." Rowan bowed her head. Noah kept his eyes open, watching the fire. When the prayer ended, Reverend Mace lingered near the door. "You've got good ground here, Mr. Dempsey, and good people under your roof. If there's something permanent being built, it might be worth marking it proper." Noah met his gaze. "That ain't your place to say." "No, it ain't," the Reverend agreed. "But I've known you since you were newlywed, and I know what it is to carry the weight of a grave longer than you need to." Rowan didn't speak, but her hands curled over one another. After the Reverend rode off, Noah fetched his coat and stepped out to the pasture. He leaned on the fence, watching the wind ripple through the tall grass. The mare had foaled early that morning, a red-legged colt still trembling with each step. Finn had named it Clover without being asked. Rowan came out after a while, her arms folded against the breeze. "You're not the only one who lost something," she said. "But I'm trying to stop living like the loss is the only part that matters." He turned toward her. "What makes you keep trying?" She looked out over the land. "Because these children need something steady, and because when I wake up here, I don't feel like I'm waiting to survive the day." The wind picked up, lifting a strand of her hair across her cheek. He reached out and brushed it back without thinking. Her eyes held his. "Do you want me to stay?" she asked. "Because it's easier than being alone again? Or because you see something worth building?" He stepped closer, voice low. "I see something I never expected to find again." She didn't answer with words, just leaned forward, their foreheads nearly touching. That night, as the fire burned low, they sat side by side at the table long after the children had gone to bed. He passed her a folded piece of paper, a deed to a parcel just west of his fence line. "I've no reason to hold it separate anymore," he said. "If you want it, it's yours." Her fingers traced the edge. "I don't need land to feel I belong, I know, but I want you to have it. I want you to have anything that makes staying feel like yours, not just mine." She looked at him a long moment, then nodded once. "Then I'll plant corn there." The next morning, Faye found a robin's nest in the rafters of the barn. She held Rowan's hand and pointed, whispering about the blue of the eggs. Finn helped Noah repair the chicken coop, hammering with focus, no longer waiting for permission to act. And that afternoon, Rowan carried a basket of seed toward the new plot. Noah watched her go, her steps certain. In the distance, the colt nuzzled its mother, and the clouds broke wide enough to let the sun light the entire field. By mid-June, the ridge grasses had grown tall and silver-green, brushing the hems of Rowan's skirts when she walked the edge of the northern field. She moved with purpose now, not like a guest, but someone who belonged. The land had begun to take her shape in small ways, rows of corn sprouting in the west plot, a clothesline strung between the barn and the cottonwood, a second set of boots by the door, worn through at the toes but neatly placed. On a warm morning, Noah led Rowan and the children out toward the creek forks, where the wild plum trees were fat with fruit. He'd spotted the blossoms weeks before and figured it was time. Faye ran ahead with a basket too big for her arms, while Finn stuck close behind. his eyes scanning the brush like he'd been told to watch for snakes. Noah kept his hand low near Rowan's elbow as they crossed the shallow stream. She didn't need the help, but she didn't pull away either. "You ever make preserves?" he asked once they reached the grove. She reached up and plucked a plum, turning it over in her fingers. "Used to make them with my mother. She'd keep a row of jars under the bed through winter, said sweet things ought to be earned." Noah gave a quiet sound in his chest. "You think we've earned any?" Rowan looked at him, serious. "I think we've carried enough weight to deserve them." They picked in silence after that, the baskets filling slow. Faye hummed a tune to herself, off-key but cheerful. Finn worked without speaking, glancing now and then toward Noah, as if checking to make sure he was doing it right. Back at the homestead, Rowan set a kettle on the stove and began washing the fruit in rainwater. She moved with practiced rhythm, sleeves rolled high, her hands stained pink. Noah chopped wood just outside the window, the sound steady and patient. That evening, long after the children were asleep, she brought him a jar wrapped in cloth. Inside, the preserves glowed deep red. "I thought you should try the first one," she said, setting it on the table. He took a spoonful slow. It was tart and sweet and warm all at once. Rowan leaned against the table, arms crossed. "I didn't expect to be here this long, didn't expect to want to be," he met her gaze. "I'm glad you are." "I keep thinking about what might come next," she said, "not just for me. For the children. If we're going to stay, they'll need proper schooling, and I'll need to find a way to earn, not just take up room." "You don't take up room," he said. "You fill it." She looked down at the floorboards. "I can teach letters, I've done it before. Maybe the other families nearby would send their young ones if I started something regular." "They would," he said, "and I've got lumber in the shed, could clear the south barn." Rowan lifted her eyes. "That's a fair bit of work." Noah's voice was low. "I'd do it for you." A long silence passed between them, not heavy, just full. "I never pictured a second chance," she said. "Didn't think I had one coming." He reached across the table and took her hand, palm calloused, fingers strong. "I didn't either. But I see it clear now." Later, as they stood at the door, Rowan looked out toward the pasture, moonlight soft over the fence rails. "There's still grief in you," she said. "There always will be," he answered. "But it doesn't keep you from this." He turned to her, the lines around his eyes deepened by the lamplight. "No, it doesn't." She leaned in, slow and sure, and he met her halfway. There was no urgency in the kiss, only steadiness, a quiet kind of knowing. Inside, the fire burned low. Outside, the land held still beneath the stars. And for the first time since Rowan had come down that trail, there was no more waiting to see what would come next. They had already chosen it. By early August, the fields had settled into their richest green. The corn stalks behind the barn stood knee-high, and the young apple tree by the porch had begun to show its first small fruit. The days came slower now, not for lack of work, but because the rhythm of it had grown familiar. Noah stood at the edge of the south barn, a measuring rope in hand. He'd cleared out the hay 2 days before, leaving behind a clean sweep of floorboards and open rafters. Rowan stepped inside beside him, a folded sheet of paper in her hand with a list of names written in careful script. 8 children, she said, glancing up at the space. "Maybe more if word spreads." He looked toward the nearest wall, nodding once. "I'll put in a second window here, morning light'll be stronger." She moved across the floor, fingers brushing the edge of the beam. "We'll need benches, a writing shelf. I have a bit of chalk left, but not enough for a whole season." "I'll ride to Stevensville this week," he said. "Pick up what you need." Rowan's brow furrowed slightly, thoughtful. "I can go with you. If we leave early, we'll be back by nightfall." He paused. "You and the children. I want them to see more than this stretch of field," she said. "And they've not been around many others their age. Might do them good." He studied her a long moment, then gave a quiet nod. "We'll take the wagon." The morning ride into town brought the scent of dry pine and warming earth. Faye sat between Rowan and Noah on the bench, her hands tucked beneath her thighs, watching the trees pass. Finn rode in the back with the grain sacks, carving careful lines into a scrap of pine with his pocket knife. At the mercantile, Rowan stepped inside with a folded list and her basket. Noah waited near the door, tipping his hat to the few locals he recognized. More than one pair of eyes lingered on Rowan, but none with malice, only quiet curiosity. Later, standing by the smithy while Noah arranged for new hardware, she leaned close. "You've lived here most of your life," she said. "Do you ever think about leaving?" "I did," he said. "Once. After Clara passed, I thought I'd head south, but I couldn't make it past the county line." Rowan tilted her head. "What stopped you?" He met her eyes. "I was afraid if I left, I'd forget the sound of her voice." Rowan didn't respond right away. The sound of the smith's hammer rang through the air behind them. "You haven't forgotten," she finally said. "But you've made room." On the ride home, Faye fell asleep against Rowan's side, and Finn dozed with his head resting on the grain sacks. The wagon creaked softly over the trail, the horses moving at a steady pace. "You ever think about marrying again?" Rowan asked, her voice low so as not to wake the children. Noah's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "I've thought about it every day these last few weeks." She turned toward him. And he glanced over at her, his profile outlined by the dipping sun. "If I asked, would you say yes?" Rowan didn't smile, but her hand found his on the bench between them. "I would." They returned home with dusk folding over the hills. That night, after the children were tucked into their quilts, Noah lit a single lantern and led Rowan to the porch. He held a small ring in his hand, simple, silver, engraved with a single line of pine etched deep. "It was my mother's," he said. "She gave it to me when I married Clara, said it should stay in the family. I want you to have it." Rowan took the ring, her fingers trembling slightly. "Then I'll wear it." He slipped it onto her finger without a word. She leaned into him, resting her head against his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her. They were married the next Sunday, beneath the cottonwood tree behind the house, with Reverend Mace officiating and 6 neighbors in attendance. Faye scattered dried wildflowers along the path, and Finn stood beside Noah with his chin held high, wearing a pressed shirt and boots Noah had polished himself. Rowan wore a dress she'd sewn from the muslin they'd once traded for and braided her hair with a strip of blue ribbon. She didn't cry, but her voice caught slightly when she said, "I will." Afterward, they shared a meal beneath the wide sky bread baked that morning, honey from a neighbor's hive, and the last jar of plum preserves. That night, after the guests had gone and the children slept peacefully in the back room, Noah and Rowan sat together by the hearth, their hands intertwined. "You built all this," she said, her voice soft. He looked at her, the firelight casting shadows across her cheek. "No, I held it together." "You made it whole." She pressed her lips to his, slow and certain. He carried her to their room without a word, and they undressed by lamplight, not in haste but reverence. They moved together like two people who had known grief and now knew grace. That winter was long but not bitter. The south barn filled with the laughter of children learning letters and numbers. The land held through the frost, and the spring that followed came early. By the next year, the apple tree bore fruit. Rowan taught school in the mornings and tended the garden in the afternoons. Noah worked the land and taught Finn how to mend fence and handle stock. Faye helped gather eggs and read aloud to the younger children. There was always food on the stove and always someone to carry the firewood. They never spoke of what they had lost. They didn't need to. What mattered now was what they had built. And it was theirs, every inch of it, a life made not of forgetting, but of choosing each other, every day that came after.